Hi, my name is Amanda Moreno,
And I'm Elena Miskinnis.
and we are grateful that you're taking some time to stop by our presentation on what it looks like to have a collaboration between music education and sports psychology. I serve as the choral music education specialist at Ball State University.
And I'm currently finishing up my dual master's in sport and exercise psychology and clinical mental health counseling with the intention of continuing to address the mental health and mental performance of musicians. I'm also a musician myself. I did my undergrad in piano performance and I still continue to study and perform piano. So given our backgrounds, our collaboration really formed out of this shared interest we have for the well-being of musicians. One story I often share when depicting the mental health challenges that musicians face is a story from a few years ago when I was an undergrad studying piano performance. And in my studio there was a grad student who was a GA, and 2 weeks before juries she was given 120 vocal scores to read, and she spent 3 nights in a row in the practice rooms overnight. And as you can imagine, her health was not doing so well those 2 weeks later when in the second jury she actually fainted. And this story has really stuck with me and influenced a lot of the work that I've been doing. It's also no wonder there's been a lot of research looking at university students' health in general, and one study has found that arts and humanities students actually experience the most moderate to severe levels of anxiety and depression and stress. And when looking across quality of life variables among musicians, psychological health is always rated as the lowest. There might be some specific instruments that are related to this, like keyboardists, for example, have been shown to have the highest levels of stress, but also the least amount of stress management behaviors. This could also be due, generally, the psychological health of musicians could be due to the high quantity of practice that's emphasized versus the quality of practice. In addition to the mental health challenges that I just described, there are also a lot of mental performance challenges that musicians naturally face. For example, things like confidence, motivation, interaction with peers, teachers. So there are a couple of studies that have looked at the mental performance of musicians, and one of these things is that when we talk about performance anxiety specifically, people, students, professional musicians have recorded that perceived stressors are pressure from self, evaluation from the audience, and just trait anxiety in general. When looking at how musicians cope with performance anxiety, some of the main techniques that they use are deep breathing, familiarization with the venue, and simply just practicing more. When we think about the mental training of musicians, people who have been preparing for an audition have rated mental training as the third highest predictor of audition success. However, they only do mental training less than 2% of the time. And then also similarly, less than 8% of musicians struggling with performance anxiety have actually sought out the help of a psychologist.
The goal of our presentation today is to demonstrate what a collaboration can look like between a mental performance consultant and a music education program. Myself, as a teacher of teachers, my primary responsibility is to provide students with knowledge and experiences that enable them to be the most effective educators in the K-12 setting. However, they cannot hope to be truly effective with young minds and young lives if their own well-being is lacking, whether that be their physical health, their emotional health, their mental health. All of these things play vital roles in how a teacher guides their own students. We will discuss in this presentation what may be possible by providing mental performance coaching, either in individual sessions and group sessions, and other resources for future music educators. If not prior to now, you may now be asking yourself, what is it that music educators can even learn from sport and exercise psychology? Elena has already alluded to the mental and emotional challenges that musicians face with regard to their performance. But we often associate those challenges specifically with performance, sometimes performance only, and yet isn't teaching also a form of performance? We are performing a duty in presenting information to our students. Music educators have to know all the things in order to teach all the students at all the times, all while managing their own lives and well-being. We, Elena and I, agree that there are absolutely ways to prepare and resource future music educators before they even enter the classroom.
Whenever I start talking with non-performers about this collaboration between sports psychology and music psychology or music educators, it is very interesting because some of them will just say, oh, we understand, like music is a physical activity as well. So they think that the association is sport and then physical activity and music, except that some of the examples they give are like strumming a ukulele or like turning a page like you're in a choir or something. I'm like, that is very different from what I have in mind. So when we talk about a collaboration between sports psychology and music education or musicians in general, we talk about something that is related more to what we would call among athletes mental fitness. Or for musicians, this could look like, instead of mental fitness, it could be like a mental training, just like you would go to the practice room and practice your instrument or your voice. So this understanding of the mind and the body connection has been something that has been developed since very ancient times, this understanding that what we think about can really impact how we perform. The actual development of sport and exercise psychology has very much developed since the 1960s and 70s to what we know it to be today, and this has especially exploded in the last couple of Olympics when people have been coming out or even dropping out of the Olympics for mental health reasons. The development of sport and exercise psychology has come out of several different fields, including exercise science, motor development, kinesiology, physical education, psychology, and we often use a scientist practitioner model in which we are doing research and using that research to inform our applied work with our performers. When we talk about psychology in general, there are some different fields. So when you think about clinical psychology, this really grew out of a space of wanting to understand the biological development of mental illness. When we talk about counseling psychology, this definitely grew out of a type of wanting to help veterans as they were coming back from war. So more of like vocational support. And then when we talk about sport and exercise psychology, this was very much grew out of a physical education environment, but like I said, it has multiple different roots. If you want to become a sport and exercise psychologist, there are two things that you need. One is you need to be a certified mental performance consultant or receive a certification called CMPC through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, or ASP. And this certification is 400 hours of work with performers, pretty much any kind, but mostly with athletes. And then if you want to add that psychologist piece, then you have to go on to either get a PhD or a PsyD in psychology. So here's a very brief glimpse of what a program like sports psychology offers students in training, and basically what I'm doing currently. So as Dr. Moreno mentioned, there are the opportunity for both group sessions and individual sessions. So when I work with athletes, right now I'm working with multiple different Division III teams, including like swim and dive, basketball, lacrosse, a couple of others that I can't even think about, volleyball. So with all of these teams, I hold weekly group sessions with them, and then some of the individuals also want some more personalized time, and that's totally fine as well. It can be hard to be like in a group setting and then also get your individual needs met. So one difference between studying counseling and studying sports psychology is that I actually go into their space. So I go to their practices, really help develop rapport by going to understand what their space is like. With counseling, you are asking them to come to your space and you don't really get to see them outside of that little room that you work with them in. So another thing that we do is also meet with coaches. In the music setting, this would look like meeting with the teachers or the professors. Attending practice could look like going to their performances, or in the case of our collaboration, it was going to Dr. Moreno's class and me being there with them as they were doing their more teaching part of their class. I also receive extensive supervision from licensed professionals in the field, and this is just to make sure that I am doing the best work possible for my clients. So similarly, upholding ethics is a very, very crucial part of anything in psychology, including sports psychology and my work as a mental performance consultant. So throughout our presentation, as we talk about the things that we did with this class and other students, other clients, I will be maintaining that confidentiality and not sharing their information so broadly so that you could identify them. Even with all of that background, I know it can be naturally hard to still understand, like, what does this really look like? So here's just a brief list. You can kind of go through this yourself. These are typical topics that we cover with both athletes and performers. As you can see, a lot of these things can translate to musicians. Some of them you can see are more like team-oriented or group-oriented, and some of them might be more individually focused.
I first became aware of the concept of mental performance work when Elena and I met in a local community choir. and started talking about our different areas of research. Not long after that, we were connected on the Ball State campus through our Student Success Office in the hopes that we might be able to establish mental performance coaching as a resource for our music students. I invited Elena to come to my choral lab class and provide some introductory sessions on mental performance skills and the value that that understanding can have for individuals. I chose this particular class because the students were sophomores and had already survived their first year of college, assuming that they might then be more able or ready to take the next step of pursuing health in this particular area. The choral lab setting is a class where on 1 week they are interacting with the choral conducting students as the laboratory choir, but then on the off weeks they're with me doing really whatever I think is going to be most beneficial or necessary for them in that particular setting. This was a perfect opportunity to bring in a new experience that, whilst new to me as a concept, the value of it made total sense to me. So we wanted to provide these interventions, or at least an introduction to these interventions in this setting, whilst also offering the potential for individual sessions beyond that class. So it was very introductory, and yet just a great, we're all here at one time, let's see what we can do.
For the rest of our presentation, we will detail the 6 different sessions that we did in this collaboration. Like Dr. Moreno said, we did have both group and individual sessions offered, but it was mainly focused on the group, so that's what I'm going to cover today. Now, I have done a lot of these different topics with multiple different other types of groups, whether that's musicians or music educators or athletes. So there are some adaptations that I make depending on the group and just over time as I've adapted these interventions. So I'm going to add some of those within the slides as well. Basically, the structure of any type of group session, they're generally 30 to 40 minutes long, depending how much your coach or your teacher gives you. You just kind of work with that. But we also have a pretty standard structure, so we always start with some kind of just like rapid fire thing to get everybody saying something really quickly. And then we might do some psycho-ed throughout the presentation just so that they have a scientific background, again, really focusing on that scientist practitioner model of sport and exercise psychology. And then we always have some kind of activity. This is just to promote engagement, and we might do some think, pair, share things afterwards, but we always follow up with a debriefing or discussion to really see what the students learned about themselves during that activity. And then after that, if there's time, we try to teach some kind of mental skill for them to take away with them, but really the most important part is that debriefing or that discussion. For any first session that I do with any group or team, including this class, the goal is to build self-awareness. Sometimes you might also want to think about goals for the semester, but that is really developed through an understanding of self-awareness. So the first thing that I do is just first talk about confidentiality. That's always the first thing we talk about in a first session. Also, some of the things I already shared with you all. What is sport and exercise psychology? What is mental fitness? And then for the main activity, you can either do like a bingo blackout where they get to know each other and then you get to let them ask questions about yourself as the mental performance consultant or as the teacher. Another really fun, engaging first session activity is having 2 people get together and one person draws on the other person's back, of course, like with a paper in between, and then the other person has to like replicate that drawing. And I love this activity especially for artists because they get to see that like what looks like very abstract or imperfect work of art is actually something that's still very beautiful. The main skill that we teach after debriefing this activity is to have this circle you'll see on the right where there are multiple different sections that you can put different mental skills that affect a performer. So when I work with teams, I'll have them actually split it down the middle. So half of it will be individual skills and the other half will be team skills. So you can do it either way with your class. If you want them to work on more group cohesion or communication, you can do this as well. Otherwise, you can just have them fill in different mental skills, just like the list of topics I had a few slides back. And basically, like I have in the example here, let's say perfectionism is something that really challenges them, or it can be something they already feel strong in. You should have a balance of both. But they will put that mental skill, let's say perfectionism, up in the top of that circle or that little section, and then they'll shade in how much they feel like they have of that skill. And when we talk about perfectionism, there are different ways of thinking about it. So really, when we think about something that might be harmful, we're thinking about how we can manage it. How can we manage burnout? How can we manage performance anxiety? If it's something like motivation, you would just shade in how much motivation you feel like you have. So 0 is in the middle, and then you would just shade in how much you feel like you have, and then that would be an area of self-awareness to understand, okay, maybe this is somewhere I want to grow in. You can also see different correlations. Somebody who might be high in motivation might also be a little bit lower in being able to manage that perfectionism. Our second session addressed performance anxiety, and whenever I do anything related to performance anxiety, I try to emphasize that I am not going to say anything that is life-changing or going to suddenly change their ability to manage performance anxiety. It's just one little step or adding a little bit of ingredients to them to be able to manage it a little bit better. So one of the things that you can do when doing a performance anxiety session is doing something that simulates some kind of performance experience. So that could be looking like a cognitive relay of 3 activities. You could have each group of people have a couple different groups of people, and they each have to complete these 3 different activities, like a word search or jumping jacks. Be creative in what you want to do. But it could also, when you're doing this activity, bring out the spots that are challenges for them. And then you can see and debrief afterwards, how did you respond during those times of adversity? So some of the psycho-ed you can do around this too is understanding the cognitive triangle, that thoughts, behaviors, and emotions all affect each other. This graph too also demonstrates the zone of optimal functioning in which a higher level of stress is actually needed for an optimal performance, but if you have too much stress, then that can lead to that decrease in performance. I also like to do a traffic light activity, which I'm going to show on the next slide, but basically it shows that optimal spot is like this green zone. Those lower spots are the red zone, and then in the middle is what we're really interested in catching you in, so that we can catch those triggers that might lead you to that red zone ahead of time. So here's that traffic light I was telling you about. I am aware that the green is at the top and the red is at the bottom, but I like to do that so we start with confidence and then end with something a little bit less confident. But this is where you would kind of write in the different spots, like what you're noticing about yourself, thoughts, what focus you're having, emotions, even some figurative words that you could use to describe those different zones, like people call green zone like very free, for example. Another activity that you can do during this time is to do like a little focus activity. So you could give them like a grid, a numbers grid, and have them just for like 20 seconds or 1 minute even, just try to see how many numbers they can find in a row, and then see like how did they shift their focus back to the grid when their focus was wandering. So one mental skill you can help with this thought wandering or self-talk is to do a thought replacement. And with this class, we basically had them write on a little card that was eventually laminated one cue word that would bring them back out of the red zone or yellow zone and into the green zone. And then after they would say that word to themselves as a cue, it would cue them thinking about something very technically related to their teaching or to their performance. So if you're a singer, you might want to think back to your breath, for example. Now, after that, they wrote on the back side just like a word of encouragement to themselves, and it was really important that they knew that word of encouragement to themselves had a lot of meaning, and it wasn't just some random affirmation that they just happened to come up with. So again, this is another activity that you can do as a part of self-talk or performance anxiety with musicians. Burnout is another hot topic among musicians, so again, it's just really careful when you start this kind of activity to know that you're not just going to suddenly get rid of their burnout, but it is good to understand that burnout is actually on a continuum of feeling overwhelmed and sacrificing things that are important to you, which leads to fatigue, which leads to then burnout, and the only thing you can do when you are burned out is to take a break. And that's a whole other conversation that can be done in individual sessions. But for this activity, we had the students pick 5 or 6 pictures that helped represent different parts of their identity. And it shouldn't be just your musical identity. It should be addressing you as a whole person. And we had them make this into like a home screen for their phone. And so again, it's really helping them to reflect on what is important to them and making sure that they're not always sacrificing those same things that are important to them.
In the next section, we talked about values, but before Elena describes exactly what that's all about, I'm going to describe an activity. So this is a group of choral music education majors. So we split them into 2 groups. I gave them a piece of music and I said, separate yourselves into these two groups and go learn this portion of the music. And that's all we said. It's the only instruction that we gave them. So one group, it's quite a large room. So one group was at one corner of the room, the other group was at the other side. And we just let them explore and see who was going to take charge, who was going to just lead, who was going to give ideas. And we gave them a specific amount of time, and then we came back and said, okay, you guys perform it for us, and then you guys perform it for us. And then we asked them to debrief and talk about how was the experience, what did they find themselves doing sort of naturally. And the most frequent response of how they felt about it was, we just wish that you guys had told us who should do what and who should be in charge.
Yeah, so we were really interested to see what roles emerged through these different groups. And from that, it was able to be another self-awareness tool of understanding how you interact and respond in a group setting. So to kind of transition out of that and into values, we had these different lists of character strengths, and we asked them to circle a couple that they felt like they have, a couple they feel like others say that they have, a couple they feel like they've grown in, and then one that they want to work on. Continuing out of values, and to wrap up all 6 sessions that we did, this is a really fun activity that can be done with pretty much any kind of group. I've done it at the end of seasons as well for teams, and it basically just helps the different athletes or the different performers in a group understand their different strengths, except you're hearing them from somebody else directly to you. So you sit in a circle and you throw a yarn around and you basically say to somebody else what you feel like is strength that they have. It so kind of like a compliment. And then that person who receives the yarn or the strength will say, this is what I need in those moments. This is what helps me be really kind, or this is what helps me be encouraging. Maybe it's, I need others around me to also be positive. So that was kind of how we wrapped up our sessions.
And with this group, again, it's their second year of school. They're all vocal choral education majors. So after this particular semester, they're going to be with each other consistently throughout the rest of their time. So they know each other. They know each other pretty well. And they're going to be teaching other groups of students in choir settings, especially, who know each other really well over a period of time. Not exclusively, but often. And so having them have the opportunity, as Elena said, to hear from their peers what their strengths are, what they demonstrate as strengths, was an opportunity to sort of fill their tank in a way that they could encourage their future students to do. Not because we need to always be complimenting one another, we need to always be, telling each other what they're good at, but because we do need to hear those things. And there, as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, these students in this group, their own well-being plays into how they can encourage and facilitate the well-being of their own students down the road.
Just to summarize what I found among these different performers as individuals and in groups, there are 3 different categories overall that I found. So one is the confidence. You can generally relate anything performance related, anxiety, perfectionism, resilience, focus, different mindsets. All of that kind of falls under confidence. I've also found a frequency of motivation, which this is more practice related, so things related to burnout, focus, time management, and goal setting. And then I've also found a lot of issues relating to social connection. We know that when we have teachers who really believe in us, that really affects our motivation and our confidence. So this is more others oriented or related, ensemble cohesion, relationship with the teacher.
Every good session has an application moment, and here it is. How does this apply to you as a professional musician, as a studio professor, as a classroom teacher, as an ensemble director? We would encourage you to look into whether it's a university where you work or a local university or other organization, where there might be a sports psychology program or entity in your community, in your area, and see if they might be open to some sort of collaboration. That's how this all began here at Ball State. We already had the sports psych program, and one of my colleagues in the School of Music reached out and said, hey, is there some way that we could connect and grab some of that knowledge and implement it with our music students? So it is very possible that in your area, your region, something like that might be available to you. If there's not, check out some of the other things that we've done today. They'll all be laid out in the PDF version of this presentation to see what kind of, I love the way Elena has this full person approach, could be available to educating your educators moving forward. We have our list of references. Those are also in the PDF, so feel free to take a moment and check those out. We also are more than happy to answer continuing questions or engage in further conversation on this. Both of our emails are listed. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. We hope that this proves to be beneficial for you, your students, and your colleagues moving forward.